Welcome to all of you to Hyderabad, to IKMC 2017. This is the 11th edition of our annual conference. It wasn't an annual conference when we started with Bala driving it at that point of time. It was 2002 when Bala said, Deepanita, if we have to really talk about what we aim to do, we need co-conspirators. We need more people to know what we are once in 2 years. From 2011, we felt that we have gained, just not IKP, but India has gained pace enough to be able to interact oftener. There's a need to interact oftener. And since then, we decided to hold IKMC every year. We normally do it in end of October or beginning of November, because IKP started, at that time it was called ICICI Knowledge Park. Later on, the name changed to IKP Knowledge Park and IKP. Our foundation day is October 28. That was in 1999, and we started operations in May 2000 in Genome Valley, which many of you, most of you have visited. And in case you've not visited, I would really urge this time or later, please make time to visit IKP. Since then, we've actually moved beyond the realms of the physical knowledge park and built relationship across India through our grants management program. And there we work very closely with BIRAC, with USAID, with DFID, with Gates Foundation. In fact, it was Gates Foundation with whom we started our grants program. When I say grants management program, we actually scout for innovations across India. We see what is happening where, and then we bring them together, we raise funds. We've raised about 114 crores so far to fund startups, and many of you are beneficiary of our grants program. There've been a need to expand beyond Hyderabad. So in 2015, IKP decided to actually start IKP Bangalore in Bangalore, of course. Where else if it's IKP Bangalore? And the difference between IKP Hyderabad and IKP Bangalore, it was also because the times have changed that we decided not to build a campus like what we have. This is our flagship campus, 200 acres of land, huge, large companies, DuPont, US Pharmacopoeia, and several others, as well as startups, but it's 40 kilometers outside the city. What we felt that if we have to really hear the voice of startups, let's build something, not really construct, let's lease out a building, a 25,000 square feet standalone building, heart of the city in Koramangala, and we started IKP. Turnaround time is fast. You don't need to spend on infrastructure so much. You take a building, make it ready for the innovation culture, and that's how very proud to say, we have over 40 startups in a span of less than 2 years, just 2 years. And Vikraman is heading our IKP Bangalore setup. It's called IKP Eden. Eden stands for Engineering, Design, and Entrepreneurship Network. The moment we say Engineering, Design, and Entrepreneurship Network, you'll also understand that IKP, with the name Knowledge Park, when we started, we looked at largely the life sciences industry, but always what Mr. Vagul had told me, Deepanita, remember, this is a stepping stone. We are not a life sciences park. We are not a biotech park. We are a knowledge park. So we would look at all areas of knowledge that are important, all areas of innovation. And sir, this is a time when we decided we need to look at interdisciplinary areas, we need to look at engineering as a part of the solutions that startups provide. Life science, biotech, medical technology is an application of the innovation of the science that we can do. And we now feel we have brought together a much larger cohort of people, much larger group of people interested in innovation in our fold by actually expanding to this interdisciplinary area of engineering. Bala will be able to tell us where technology is moving, which are the other areas we need to look at, what would be IKP 2.0, how do we need to change ourselves, what we need to do. It's important to note the theme of the conference this year, which is Startup to Scale Up. There's a reason for calling it Startup to Scale Up. We have found that most of the startups, we play in the early stage of the development cycle of a venture. Starting up in India has been made relatively easy by institutions like BIRAC. That is no longer a challenge. The challenge is, what do you do after your first grant is over? How do you raise funding? How do you actually scale up? Are the paradigms of scaling understood well enough for our companies to become global companies? How do we make our startups? Not everyone would become. That's how life is. Everyone is not going to succeed. But in areas which are very IP-driven, technology-driven, how do we actually make global companies from India? That is what we aim to discuss in this conference. That is the reason why we have 5 workshops in areas that we believe, and we have taken feedback from startups before designing our workshops on what they would want to learn. The areas that came to us were, of course, term sheet valuation, licensing. As usual, people talked about design for manufacturability. People talked about customer access, market access. And some people wanted to know about leadership, organization culture and leadership. That's, again, very important. When you are a 2-person, 3-person science-based startup, that is not a priority for you. But when you want to scale, you need to really see how you build your organization. So leadership is a very important aspect. And I'm happy that we've been able to organize. In the afternoon, we have 5 workshops for startups. We also have roundtables parallelly running to discuss about creating innovation cities. Because, the discourse globally has changed from setting up incubators and science parks to actually look at a city as an engine of innovation. No longer can an incubator really make a difference. If the city has to come together to actually make a difference, what all do we need to do at the city level or at the cluster level to really make innovation happen? And that's we are going to discuss. Is it the space that's important? What is important? So we want to rethink space. We started Knowledge Park 18 years back thinking that we needed land, we need infrastructure, but is space that important? How do we actually democratize space and look at innovation in a much more inclusive manner? And that's what we would like to discuss. We would also discuss platforms for scaling up. Day 2 is about startup pitch. It would be fantastic to hear 40 startups give their teaser pitch. The teaser pitch is not to get the first check from your investor. The teaser pitch is basically to get the visiting card of an investor to say, hey, I'm interested to hearing you out more. So you're teasing them to really get the interest, to catch their interest. So that's the idea. And in the afternoon, we have some peer learning session and the valedictory session. I'm sure all of you will be with us for the next 2 days, deliberating on various issues. Trust me, we are organizing this so that there are enough takeaways for each one of us. I'm going to learn, all of you are going to learn. If you come back and tell me I've not gained anything from that, I have to, as the head of the organization, start thinking, why did we waste somebody's time? So I think the idea is that everyone gains. And I would also request BIRAC to take our recommendations to form policies so that the gain can be taken forward in a more holistic manner. I'm sure Dr. Ruben Swamikan here will talk about how entrepreneurship can be taken to a global summit and all that. I'm not going to keep you waiting from hearing Bala. I'm a great fan of Bala and Bala's talk, so I'm just raring to hear what Bala has to talk about, 50 years of managing creativity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a matter of considerable embarrassment to me to come and stand before you and talk. The reason why I'm embarrassed is when I told Deepanvita, she sent me a routine invitation because I've been part of this setup for the last more than a decade. I happened to found this park. This was my idea conceived by me and started. So I think it is more by way of a routine. She sent an invitation to me. And I keep accepting it. But she has to somehow or other accommodate me in this function. Okay. Now, the problem of speaking in a conference like this is that realize that I am out of date. The environment around us is changing so fast, so rapidly, that even if you want to, it's very difficult to keep pace with the change that is really taking place. Much of the changes are something, a few years back, I made it a point to keep myself updated with whatever was happening in the technology, in the innovation space, in the way in which things are being done. But the last few months have been somewhat painful in a sense. The changes are far too rapid. The lingua is changing. You don't speak the same language. You can pick up a piece of book and then you can start reading it. It doesn't make any sense to you. It talks of words, it talks of phrases which are new, which you have to run to a dictionary, you have to talk to somebody in order to find out what this means. Till recently, I did not know anything about the blockchain technology. Now, if I had to become familiar with the blockchain technology, I have to understand it. And I think I have become too old for me to run around it. So I thought that the best man to really deal with topics and make sense to you, because my speech would not make any sense to you at all. But people like those who are here, Bala is my younger brother, and he is in the center of things. Renu is in the center of things. They're in the place where things are happening. They would be in a position to convey something important to you. I, for one, would have nothing relevant to say to you. So Deepanvita tried to contrive it by saying that, can you think of learning the lessons from the past? It's a fact, I concede, that I did create a lot of institutions. And I was not an entrepreneur. I was a paid employee of the bank. As a professional, banking is my career. I started my career in the State Bank of India and moved from one bank to another bank. partly through fortuitous manner, and ended up in ICICI Bank, where I headed the institution for 25 years. So I was an employee. Now, how can an employee be an entrepreneur? But still, people credit me and with having created a large number of institutions. And these institutions been created by me, not with any money on my own or not for my purpose, but I felt it for an obligation that I have to create it. Well, I did create the first venture capital company in the country. I did create the first credit rating company in the country. I first created the first securities company in the country. These are all way back in 80s and 70s. And then I created this knowledge park. I created the business school. But looking back, I said that knowledge park, when we created 15 years back, it was quite a challenge. And it took 3 years for us to attract the first tenant in the knowledge park. And there are not many people who are coming in. But the knowledge park itself is a case study of how do you really scale up a park like this. Dipanita was a young girl when she came, and I asked her, you take it and run it. And she was able to bring it up to this product. So looking back, I think, how do I say, what lessons do I learn from having created so many institutions? Quite a few of them are for profit, like the rating company or the securities company or the venture capital company. A large number of them are for not for profit, like Knowledge Park or the business school or university. So what triggered this whole process? Does it have a relevance for the innovation that is the theme of this conference? There is someone in the audience with whom I attend class these days. I don't know whether he is present here or not. Rama by name, he is there. So we both go to classes on Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. I had read Patanjali Yoga Sutra about 30 years back, 20 years back. But now, along with him, I regularly attend a class every Saturday or every alternate Saturday, going through the slokas and then meaning of the slokas. What impressed me was the fact that the slokas are very crisp, to the point. They don't, it's not an essay. It is not a commentary. For example, the second of that stanza, which he says this, simply say, Siddhi, Vritti, Nirodha. These are the three. That is mind, modification, stop. That's all. This is the way in which 195 slokas are written. And this is supposed to convey a meaning. Let me see whether I can make my lessons into this meaning. The first, I think, lesson I learned is that if you really want to scale up, if you want to innovate, I think you have to forget yourself. And the idea is more important than you. And an idea crops in your mind, that the idea becomes an all-powerful one. You disappear and the idea remains. It almost sounds a little bit spiritual, but that's a fact. You will experience it. The moment you think of yourself, the idea disappears. Only you remain. And the innovation will not remain. So the characteristic of innovation is that focus on the idea. You keep on focusing on the idea. You forget about the fact that you have anything to do with that. You are the creator of it. The moment you get into a feeling that I am responsible for this idea and I am going to bring this idea to a fruition, you will not be able to bring the idea to the fruition. The idea will be much more important. Focus on the idea. I said I would start a credit rating company in 86. And we didn't have the skill set to do that. So I had to go and ask a US company, Moody's, who are well rated, the credit rating company, to come and do a survey for me and let me know how do I do it. They came and spent 2 months here. They came to my room and told me, Mr. Vagul, we have something sad to tell you. India is not ripe for credit rating, and you will not be able to start a credit rating here. I asked why. Because Indian environment, economic environment, was not conducive for a credit rating agency. So I told them, I'm glad you did it, but I'm going to start a credit rating agency. Because I'm not looking at what is happening now, but what is likely to happen tomorrow. And I know that it is going to take a while for the country to improve. So I'm looking at it 5 years from today. And I have to start investing today. So I started it in 86. So the second lesson which I learned is that when the idea becomes important, the idea is not pursued for the idea's sake. The idea is pursued for the larger objective of a nation. My organization had nothing to gain by this credit rating agency. In fact, how can a bank gain anything by credit rating agency? It was a different activity. So people asked me, why as a banker you create a credit rating agency? I think the nation is important. So the second lesson was focus on the idea, but the idea must be external to you. The nation is more important than the idea. So you look at the nation. The third important lesson which I learned is that when a failure stares you at your face and you think that it will not be possible for you to overcome the challenge that is there, for a variety of reasons. It can happen in your business, it happened. My business, when I started this credit rating agency, I was still the chairman of the ICICI Bank at that time. We recruited about 40 people. And what Modi said was correct. The economic environment did not favor a credit rating agency. How do you run a credit rating agency where there is no differentiated system of interest rate pricing, where the weaker person got a lower interest rate, the more successful person got a higher interest rate. That's just the reverse of what was happening in the developed markets. So they said, you can't do that. You can't do a credit rating exercise on that part. So it became a challenge. I had to go and talk to the government. Can we not free the interest rates? Should it be administered interest rates? That was not possible. 40 people were sitting before me like you people are sitting. They were depressed. They were the best of the brightest from the business schools I recruited. So what do I do with these people? They said that, do you think that the credit rating agency will last? I told them we will make it work. If it does not work for some reason, then I assure you that each and every one of you will join the ICICI Bank. And you are not putting your career on the block. You will be assured of the career on the block. So like that, you can always find ways in which you can really overcome it. So the lessons which I learned are fairly simple. Can you give up the I-ness in you? As I said, it may sound spiritual. The more and more you think of yourself in the innovation field, the less and less the idea will take shape. Second, you work for a larger purpose. You don't work for the limited purpose of creating wealth for you. Of course, an innovation will lead to a point where wealth will be created. But that wealth will be created for the nation. The wealth will be created for the public good. The wealth will not be created for you. If that feeling comes in, your idea will work. But the moment you think that I want to make money out of this innovation, I want to become rich, if that becomes the motive, then there are less chances of the innovation really taking shape. The third and the most important thing which you have to have is, you need to look around the ecosystem and the group which will help you to create it. One of the ways is which I was able to successfully create a large number of institutions is that I know that I cannot do it. I don't exist. I need to develop a group of people who can really think of this idea. So went around, collected a group of people. In every organization, we collected the best and the brightest of the people who could really work. And this is the group which is in a position to develop that system. If we believe that I as a owner will have the responsibility to develop the system, you will never succeed. You will have to get the right type of people. And whether it was the rating company or the securities company, or even for that matter, Lawrence Park, we went around and developed that group. See, it became a powerful feeling. I mean, I used to talk to my friend that day when we were talking that you can do meditation under the Yoga Sutra. You can sit and meditate. It is not necessary for you to be in a group. But there is a whole world of difference between the way in which you sit in your room and meditate and the way in which you can sit and meditate in a group. I think the group energy has a very powerful impact on your way of thinking. Individual energy also works, but the group energy works much more powerfully. There is an interconnectivity that takes place between one person and another person. This is invisible, but that invisible energy really leads to an entirely different paradigm. And that is an important lesson in innovation also. When you talk, you can put any words there. Words are actually our creation. I mean, it is the meaning that is important. We can put any word, and I think you can call it a mic, you can call it by some other name. Because we all agree that it is a mic, we call it a mic. Like that, you can talk in terms of ecosystem, you can talk in terms of environment, you can talk in terms of any other name. But what is important is the collective energy of the people will have to be applied to development of a new idea for the benefit of the larger good of the public, society, the nation is more important than the individual. If we are able to do that, I think we would be able to achieve wonders in the innovation project. But the moment you give it up and said, this product is my product, I have created it and I want to create it and I want to benefit out of it, I think there are less chances of it succeeding. It may succeed. For some people it may succeed. I'm not saying it will not succeed, but there are less chances of it succeeding. I think this is the lesson which I learned in that. I know that this is not the theme of the conference. This is not what you want to hear. I think the challenges that are placed before the environment, the rapid changes in the environment, the technology. I could never have imagined about a few years back, I could just take my iPhone and then tell the iPhone, what is my next flight to Chennai? And then I will get an answer there. That's what is the next flight to Chennai. I mean, last few months back, I could never imagine that happening. And it is happening today. Like that, things are 2 years from today, the world in which we are living in would be a different world. And we will have to equip ourselves to that. You think that you have developed a big idea, and that idea would be an outdated idea by the time you come to 2 years from today. That humility that will have to be there, that we will have to keep on learning. We will have to keep on interacting with that environment. Unless that is what the ecosystem does. You keep on interacting with people who come up with new ideas. And then your idea takes shape. I think these are the important lessons which I have learned in this. And I thought that I will devote my speech to this particular phenomenon. About how exactly you go about, how do you really scale it up. There are people who are in the midst. I said I have become irrelevant. I sit in a corner in my house. I just reflect. I don't do anything else. But these are the people who are in the midst of the happening things. They would be in a position to give you a much better feel of what is really happening and much better feel of what is going on, the way in which you go about it. As Dipanita felt, if this conference serves the purpose of making you think in a different direction, of making you feel that you are worthwhile to contribute to the society. Finally, let me end on this, again repeating that observation. The I-ness will have to go. You have to work for the larger purpose. And 3, you will have to work in a group. These are the 3 which are important lessons. And with these lessons you keep in mind, I think you will succeed. Thank you very much.
Deepan Vitak called me and said, with just less than a week's notice, and said, I want you to talk about, creativity and innovation over the last 5 decades. And then I thought about why 5 decades. I just completed 5 decades in the United States. I left on September 5th, 1967, and I've been in US since then. And obviously, I've been in Silicon Valley since 1975, and the term Silicon Valley was first used in 1971. And so basically what I'm going to do in talking about managing creativity and everything else, to me, they are really amorphous words. I don't know how to put substance to it. However, that the idea of framing a problem and finding a solution to that problem is something concrete. And so what I'm going to talk about in the next 15, 20 minutes is how that problem solving has affected creativity and innovation over the last 5 decades. And one of the advantages that I've had is that I come from optical sciences. I was trained as an optical engineer. Optics has always been really about basically allowing somebody to do something with optics that you couldn't do before. So I'm going to digress a little bit to set the stage as historically what role as optics has played. So Walter Isaacson, who wrote the book about Steve Jobs, has recently released a book on Leonardo. And when you think about Leonardo, you think about Mona Lisa. And if you go to Louvre in France and you look at this picture, and it is a painting, and you think about Smile. And really, what was unique about the way that Leonardo focused on that, painting was made on a commission from a wealthy person and for his wife and so on. Leonardo never sold that painting. And if actually what he did in terms of what constitutes that smile is that he actually looked at the interaction between the light falling on the face and the muscles that creates that smile. So in a lot of ways, Leonardo used optics, the understanding of the optics, and how it played a role in arts. And in fact, if you look at the Last Supper, the painting on the Last Supper, the way the shadows and the way the light in the background through the window comes through. Today, in computer animation, we use ray tracing in order to create those concepts. But in actuality, Leonardo used the understanding of optics to produce the art, and it played a role. If you look at Galileo, and you think in terms of Galileo more in the form of understanding physics and understanding acceleration and things of that nature. But, really Galilean telescope was one of the first things that Galileo developed. And use of the telescope allowed him to ascertain that Copernicus' theories were really relevant and that indeed Earth is not center of the universe at all. And if you actually look at Newton, we think in terms of Newton, in terms of laws of motion. But Newton made enormous contributions to optics. If you think in terms of the spectral distribution in light, it comes from Newton. Newton was the first one to describe how the rainbow is formed and how they play a role. So optics has always been, in terms of a tool that allowed people to do things that they couldn't do before. Einstein, for example, got this Nobel Prize for Einstein is with the invention of the optical effects, not for relativity. So he was also very much involved in understanding the role of optics. And in fact, I jokingly say this, that working in optics, you're actually working in the spiritual world. Because of all of the sciences, the only science that's mentioned in the Old Testament is optics, because God said, let there be light, and then there was light. So he didn't say that let there be biology, for example. So basically, being in optics actually forces you to think in terms of not optics as a science on its own, but how you use optics to solve other problems. So the first decade that I spent in the United States, I actually earned my credentials. I equipped myself through basically all the disciplines that go into how optics plays a role in its relations to other matter. So the second decade has been about the credentials that I earned and applied them to developing designs. So in 1975, I helped develop the first generation of the supermarket scanners. And I didn't invent the barcode. I did not even invent the idea of using lasers to scan the barcode. But what I did was I framed the problem that in order for these scanners to go under the counter in a grocery store, it has to have a certain size and it has to have some shape. So the framing of the problem allowed me to design and develop a system that can be mounted on the checkout counter to be able to do the barcode reading. Also, for example, the idea of solid-state microscopes. And, I said that in a normal microscope, you have got stereo binoculars, stereo eyepieces. And when you actually sit down and you think about it, the role of the microscope is to magnify an image and display the image. And so to me, because I have only one eye, and it always said that the other half of the microscope was useless. So it made it easier for me to go and design solid-state systems in terms of essentially taking the image directly into the computer and displaying those images on the screen. So basically, if I think in terms of the second decade, it's always been about specifications, about capabilities, and how do you do something from a performance point of view of an instrument. The third decade is really about taking those tools that have been done and applying to a different area. So essentially, if I want to go back and regurgitate what I just said, credentials were developed, and then I learned the skills about how to apply those skills to credentials to create instruments, and the third was to apply the instruments to create new capabilities. For example, I have an Academy Award for my contributions to the field of digital cinematography. And basically, I worked with the first 3 employees of Pixar to be able to take live action film and convert them into digital format and add special effects that have been computer generated and put them back into film. But it's really, while that's art, but it's really the optics that made that possible to do. So, or for example, if you look at CT and MRI images, when the images that are generated in CT and MRI have much depth of information, and CRTs in those days didn't have the capabilities to display that depth of information. So the idea of using optics and understanding the interaction of how the eye processes that information, namely, can I map the logic curve? Your eye is a logarithmic detector. Can I compress the information in a way to display it on the film, to be able to develop the first laser film recorder for use in medical imaging? So basically, the third decade was spent in terms of deploying the instruments that I have acquired into those areas. In the fourth decade, I became very interested in life science instrumentation. So essentially, to take the systems that were developed, they were purely optical systems with great capabilities, and then go across from one field to another, apply the concept of these new capabilities and go to a completely new field and enable them to do something that they couldn't do before, whether it was protein-protein interactions, or to analyze cells in a flow cytometer, or to be able to do DNA sequencing. So really, the idea in the fourth decade was take them, apply them, and solve a problem that could not be solved without those translations. The fifth decade is really about all these instruments and all these technologies. You've now built an ability to generate data. And you've now accumulated a lot of data. And the data, if it remains as data, nothing but it will be pieces of data. But rather, how do you use contextual information of the field to which this instrumentation has been applied and the data has been generated? How do you see the relation? How do you process the data? How do you organize the data? How does it become information? How does the information become knowledge? And so in essence, you're no longer operating on the periphery of the science to which you have helped with the optics, but rather now you have to go deeper into the science itself, and you need to make sense out of the data you help generate. And I always say this, when I involved in the supermarket scanner, building it in 1975, I never thought that it wasn't about being able to allow a checkout counter to go faster so that you could check out more people. It's really about what type of a potato chips is being sold more effectively in what communities. It's really about inventory management and inventory control and matching particular supply chain to the distribution of goods and services that met the needs of that particular population. That's clear much later rather than when I was doing the supermarket scanner. So if you look at my evolution of my own thought over this 5 decades, it's been moving in a particular direction. Now let's take this and really think in terms of Silicon Valley in a broader sense. In the 1970s, it wasn't about the companies that were the dominants in the Silicon Valley were not Intel or Google. It was Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard was known as an instrumentation company. Varian was an instrumentation company and built many of the instrument companies. And in fact, there's a very interesting YouTube that describes about the secrets history of Silicon Valley. And when you look at it, it's the instrumentation applied for reconnaissance is what the domination was. But then came how that instrumentation was used in the manufacture of integrated circuits. And the integrated circuits became smaller and smaller. And then the hardware and software that brought those integrated chips into systems. And basically, those systems then enable the generation of data. And now you have Google, you have Apple, you have Facebook, simply benefiting from that ecosystem. You know, I'm not saying that making those chips are not important, or in my own case, making those systems are no longer important. But what happens in this ecosystem is what you generate over a period of time becomes routine. When it becomes routine, they become commoditized. And therefore, in an innovation-driven, creative type of a situation, you have to keep going up the value chain. Otherwise, very soon, it will become, you will still have a contribution to make, but that contribution is not as effective as if you can keep going up in the value chain. You know, you are a product of your environment. There's a symbiotic and synergistic interplay between the organism and the ecosystem in which the organism exists. And in fact, I'm going to tell you that in life sciences, what you will find in the next decade, there's going to be a lot more discussion about the interaction between your microbiome and yourself, and how the microbiome is actually making an impact on your own health. My advice is, and maybe I, with all the gray hair, one cannot and should not copy or try to duplicate what happened in Silicon Valley. It is simply a guidebook. It's not a roadmap. What works in Silicon Valley may not work outside of Silicon Valley. However, there are lessons to be learned from Silicon Valley. You know, I keep telling myself, with all this focus on immunology and cell biology and everything else, I am basically an optical engineer, still very much interested in using optics to enable somebody to do something that they could not do. I am actually a poster child for the statement that you go to school to learn how to learn, and what you learn will be obsolete even before you leave school. Basically, I'm going to tell you that ecosystems, creativity, innovation are not stationary. They move constantly. But the ability to keep up with that is within you. If I were to quote Galileo, and he said, "You cannot teach man anything, but you can only help him find it within himself." And he also said, "All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered, but the point is to discover them." And I'm hoping that in a couple of years, I'm going to come back. I'm going to talk to you about the new activity that I'm involved in, about engineered T cells and how the engineered T cells are making an impact in terms of dealing with diseases, and so on. So in essence, the journey is continuous. So I'm going to stop and say that my learning continues. I still endure, and a new journey has begun for my 6th decade. Thank you very much.